Okay, this is just really bone-chilling testimony from one of the alleged victims of Jeffrey Willis. She's explaining, and you heard it there, how he abducted her, or she says he abducted her, put a gun to her face, and how she jumped out of a moving car to escape him. And if it wasn't for this testimony, this interview, because police then later interviewed her, they may not have been able to link this man to the disappearance of two other women. Right now, Jeffrey Willis, he's on trial in Michigan. We're following it live. He's accused of abducting and killing that mom, Jessica Haranga. And I'm here alongside Dan Schorr, one of our frequent legal analysts. And he came with him, folks, he came with him a big folder because he's always a prepared attorney. And he has researched this case. What do you think here?
Well, listen, you can't come here unprepared. That would just be
That's a requirement,
terrible.
Especially as an attorney.
Absolutely. I'm always prepared. But it's a fascinating case. I mean, first of all, if this victim who jumped out of the van did not do that, she most likely would be killed if you believe the prosecution theory that two other people were killed in a similar way. And that's such a horrible situation for her to be in, that you are at gunpoint being abducted, you jump out of a moving vehicle or risk your fate with that person. And you know, fortunately, she's alive, and that led to him being arrested for these other two killings also, one of which he's already been convicted of, which makes this even more interesting because he's being tried for a murder, and he's already been convicted and sentenced to life in prison for a different murder. So that gives the defense a lot more freedom in terms of what he can say at trial, because the stakes aren't the same because he's probably facing life no matter what, although he's very active in his defense, coaching his lawyer, passing notes, so he's definitely involved. But in the end, he's probably going to serve life no matter what.
Yeah, this is certainly a very interesting case, and we have more testimony from that victim in just a few minutes. I want us to take a quick break, but we'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime. I'm your host for this afternoon, Rachel Stockman. Special welcome to our Sirius XM listeners. You were just listening to testimony from one of the alleged kidnap victims of Jeffrey Willis. We're about to go live into his trial, and things are about to get very interesting, okay? He's on trial in Michigan for the abduction of another woman. Unfortunately, she did not survive, according to prosecutors. She was abducted, killed, murdered, her body never found. I'm here alongside Dan Schorr, managing director at Kroll, also former prosecutor. Let's talk about this afternoon, because this is really important. The defense is going to be able to present their side, and we were just placing bets. We think Jeffrey Willis is going to testify.
I think he's going to testify. In a normal trial, the defendant would never testify here. The evidence, a defendant usually doesn't do well testifying in a case like this, but this is not a normal case. He's not a normal defendant. He was convicted of another murder before. He testified in that other trial before. So he has nothing to lose, and he seems very active in his defense, so I expect him to testify here.
So this is a guy, based on what we've been hearing from the police interviews, and we did follow his other trial where he testified, he thinks he's smarter than everyone. He thinks he's outsmarted the police. Because for this particular crime, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence. I'm not denying that, but there's really no direct evidence. So I agree with you that I think we could see him testify, because he wants to drive that home and kind of beat his chest about how proud he is.
Right, and it's going to be trouble testifying, though. How is he going to explain his computer files that seem to indicate that he had information about her on his computer? He'll be cross-examined about that. How will he explain that? The van that he drives, the gun that he's had, the other matters that he's the one who's convicted of, and the abduction of the woman who ran away. How will he talk about that? Cross-examination will not be easy for him.
This is about to get really, really interesting as we wait for the trial to begin in Michigan. We'll take you there live just as soon as we get our feedback. In the meantime, we are going to listen to some testimony. I should say it's not testimony. It's a 911 call, and this is critical because it's by one of the alleged kidnap victims when we get back in just a minute. And just to give you some context here, that woman that's on the stand right there that we're listening to this 911 tape with is the woman, the neighbor, where this young woman ran to her house. And she went to her house and then called 911 to tell this harrowing tale of trying to escape this guy. Really, really Scary stuff. I'm here alongside Dan Schorr. Dan, when the jurors hear a tape like this, that definitely has to take a toll on them.
Oh, it's chilling, and some of your
Yes.
viewers and listeners may be wondering, how is that admissible? Isn't that prejudicial? Because it's a separate incident, not related to what he's being charged with here.
Right.
And the reason is, it's a common scheme or plan that he's accused of using the same modus operandi, using a van, luring someone in, using the same gun on 3 separate occasions, including the one he's accused of, and including this girl. Now she's past age of, so she could give her name, but at the time she couldn't give her name. But anyway, it all has the same pattern of practice, same common scheme, so it's admissible to show this is how he conducts himself. If that wasn't a common scheme, it would be not admissible because it would be considered too prejudicial.
And it's also important because she testified to this van, that silver van, right? Mm-hmm. And that silver van was also involved in the abduction of Jessica Harenga, and that is what he's currently on trial for. Her abduction and her murder. We don't have a body here yet, but there's a lot of evidence linking him to this crime.
Right, and showing that he used this type of vehicle to try to abduct someone is relevant in the common scheme or plan to whether he killed the woman who he's accused of killing here. So that's why it's admissible, because it's the same pattern of practice on these different occasions, and otherwise it would not be admissible.
And just for the record, folks, when Willis testified about this and talked to police, he basically said that he never tried. He admitted to the whole situation, that he was in the car, that the girl needed to use a cell phone, but he actually said, no, he didn't try to abduct her, that this was all one big misunderstanding. Okay, I find that very hard to believe, considering, listen to this. Take a listen to the rest of that 911 call. All right, so you hear this crying, hysterical woman. She is one of the alleged kidnapping victims of Jeffrey Willis. But according to Jeffrey Willis, if we believe him, well, he never was trying to abduct her. He wasn't trying to scare her. They just had a little misunderstanding here. And she's kind of making up this whole gun and escape situation. You buy it, Dan?
I'm a little skeptical of that argument. Listen, when you hear her voice, that's just resonates sincerity, right? And that's one thing that's so powerful about these 911 tapes, whether it's this case or a domestic violence case. When you hear how someone's reacting in the moment, when they don't have time to think about it, think of a story, maybe fabricate, when they're in the moment and you hear the scream, the cries, and then you think of what would be her motive to make this up. She just got into a van with someone.
She doesn't know Jeffrey Willis.
She doesn't know him, and all of a sudden she just decides to jump out of a moving van and have these injuries, either accidentally or self-inflicted.
Lose her shoes, go running for.
How is
she's
that all?
Scared of her
run
life.
into a house, call for 911. It's implausible that she would just make this up. There's no motive to do it, and it's hard to. She's not an actress, as far as we know, to fake a 911 call like that. So this is really, really powerful testimony.
Very powerful, and that is why, if he takes the stand, Jeffrey Willis, and tries to, because he's going to be questioned about all of this. If he takes the stand this afternoon, we're waiting. Any minute now, we're going to go back to court. We might see Jeffrey Willis on the stand. If he takes the stand and he tries to say once again that this poor girl, Madison Nygaard, is misunderstanding the whole situation, that's not going to have much credibility in the jurors' eyes.
Right. And remember, he testified the last trial, but he was also convicted in the last trial. So it's possible he'll say, hey, that didn't work for me. I'll try something different here and not testify. Or he'll say, I want to testify. I told my story before. I'm going to tell it again. Maybe it'll work this time, but I'm certainly going to be active and testify. So it could go either way.
Very, very interesting. So if you're just joining us here on the Law and Crime Network and listening on Sirius XM Radio, we are waiting any minute, watching the clock very carefully, because the defense, finally, we are going to hear from the defense in the Jeffrey Willis case. I want to know what they're going to put forward as evidence proving that Jeffrey Willis didn't do this. Because right now, Dan Schorr, we have a lot of evidence linking him. We have a creepy so-called rape kit. We have the van. We have eyewitness testimony. We have that drop of blood outside the gas station. Where the defense is going to go with this, I'm not sure.
And we know that he had a gun that he used in at least one other crime, maybe two, if you believe this person said there was a gun pointed at her. So if he used that same gun in all three, that's also powerful evidence that he took the gun from a neighbor, a friend, and then he used it. And he's already been convicted of one murder. He's accused of another one here. And then you heard that powerful testimony in the 911 call from another woman who was abducted and jumped out of a van, according to the prosecution.
So I want us now to play some of the testimony from the woman. So when we were playing that 911 call, you saw a woman sitting there, and she was listening to the call along with the jurors. She's very important to this case because she's the neighbor. Madison Nygaard, the teenager, ran to her house, called 911. Here's her testimony. Let's take a listen. Okay, so this is the testimony of Dawn Schmidt. She is the neighbor where one of Jeffrey Willis's alleged kidnap victims ran to her house, and she's just describing this hectic situation where this poor young girl is there, terrified, out of her mind, and of course they call police, and that is what leads investigators to Jessica Harenga and her disappearance. Of course, we're going to take you live any minute inside the Jeffrey Willis murder trial. And why this testimony is so important is because it links Jeffrey Willis to the disappearance of Jessica Harenga. He's on trial now for her murder. And we're expecting any minute now for testimony to resume. And maybe this is why you should stick around to the Law&Crime Network, because maybe we're going to see Jeffrey Willis take the stand himself. Remember, he's already a convicted killer, accused, pretty much a serial killer, accused of being a serial killer, abducting these women. I'm here alongside Dan Schorr. I mean, what do you make of that neighbor's testimony?
Again, it's powerful because she describes what she saw in the terror in this woman who ran away from the van, according to her story, that she ran under a bed, she was screaming, "He has a gun, you have to hide." And the neighbor, she's calm on the stand, but I'm sure she wasn't calm at the time, because when someone runs in and tells you they just escaped someone with a gun, you don't know if that person is coming after her and is going to be there also, and she can't find
it. And Dan, there it is.
There's the van, and then she wants to call 911, and her phone's not in that room, so she has to go get her phone and call 911. You could just imagine the frantic scene, and again, it goes to the credibility of that girl who escaped the van, that she's in such terror. Does that happen by misunderstanding, as the defendant had testified in a previous trial? It's hard to imagine that.
But of course, according to Jeffrey Willis, this girl is just making the whole thing up. I mean, yeah, he was there and offered to let her use his cell phone, but he didn't mean to scare her. This was all a big misunderstanding.
Right, and as ridiculous as that sounds, he kind of has to say that, because what else can he say? He can't say it wasn't me because she can identify him. What else can he say? He has to say it was a misunderstanding, or he could admit to it, which obviously he's not going to do. So he's kind of stuck with that story as the only thing he can say, and it doesn't ring true according to everything we're hearing, the 911 tape, the testimony from the neighbor, and other evidence.
Okay, here's one thing that's very interesting. We're looking at pictures right now of Jeffrey Willis. He's tearing up. Not sure why he was tearing up in that picture, but when I've been watching him through this trial, he has his highlighter out, he has his notebook out, he's conferring with his attorneys. Usually when we watch these murder trials, I hate to say it, the defendant just kind of sits there, but literally this guy acts like an attorney, okay? Sometimes if you didn't know it, you'd think maybe he's on the defense team. Strange? Well,
there's two things about that. One, I've seen a lot of violent criminals who in court present very responsible. They're in a suit, they're clean cut.
I would never do anything.
Absolutely. The second part of that is you hear the testimony about his computer, how he had this organized folders and subfolders, some including allegedly the victims in these crimes. He had done research about other serial killers, and he had that all really organized on his computer. So apparently he's an organized guy. If he's guilty of what they're accusing him of doing and he's been convicted of one murder, he is a serial killer, but he also seems to be very methodical, thinks things through, has a plan. And remember how close he came to getting away with this, because they had no idea he was the killer until this girl escaped from his van.
Okay, speaking of these pornography, murder videos, all of that, you mentioned it. He had thousands, according to detectives, thousands and thousands of pieces of just disturbing stuff on his laptop. But here's the crazy thing about all of this. His wife. He had a wife. Jeffrey Willis had a wife. And she was asked about all of these videos and whether she had any idea about any of this on the stand. When we get back after break, we're going to listen to some of her testimony. We'll be back in just a minute. It's amazing to try to kind of grapple, like put your mind around this woman, okay? She's living with this man. She's married to this man who's now facing all of these charges, already convicted for murdering a woman, now facing these additional charges of abducting and murdering that young mom, Jessica Horenga. He's found with thousands and thousands of methodically organized pornography and murder videos on your computer. You're the wife of this man. You're on the stand and you have no idea, Dan Schorr, what your husband is up to. It's like every wife's worst nightmare. I can't even imagine.
Right. Now, even if she didn't know that he was abducting women, killing women, as the prosecution alleges, you think there would be some bizarre behavior at home that she would know about. But really, it's a lot to put on her to have her testify about that in open court. She was married to him. She may still be in fear of him. It's hard to imagine that he presented as a well-adjusted husband while he was doing all this other activity. And remember, this isn't just run-of-the-mill porn. This is murder porn, rape porn, and videos that were taken of other people without them knowing about it, it seems like, from the videos. So there's a lot of bad activity by him. Did she not know about any of it? It's hard to believe, but it's understandable why she might want to say, look, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she suspected certain things or there were certain kind of weird things he would do, but the extent of what he was allegedly caught with is honestly just staggering. And one particular piece of testimony that I think is very important is that Gerald McCarthy, he's that computer forensic expert, and he dissected in detail what was found on Jeffrey Willis's computer. Of course, Willis is now on trial for the murder and abduction of Jessica Horenga, that 25-year-old young mother. Let's take a listen to some of McCarthy's testimony. Wow, just really, really disgusting stuff, and I certainly hope you don't try to attempt to go to any of these websites because I'm sure you will not like what you find. This testimony is pretty damning, isn't it, Dan?
Absolutely. It paints a picture of the defendant, what his character was, what kind of activity he engaged in, what he was interested in, abduction, rape, murder. That's all consistent with the allegations against him. So that's very powerful evidence.
Yeah, and it's very disturbing evidence. When we get back, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, more of this guy's testimony, what was found on Jeffrey Willis's computer. Of course, he's the guy on trial for the abduction and murder of a young mom. We'll be right back. And welcome back, everybody, to the Law and Crime Network and to our listeners on Sirius XM Radio. In just minutes, and I promise it will be minutes, hopefully, we'll take you live back to Muskegon County, Michigan, where this man, Jeffrey Willis, is on trial for the murder and abduction of a young mom named Jessica Horenga. Lots of circumstantial evidence, and we've been listening to some of that evidence, including really disturbing things found on his computer, but no what we call direct evidence linking him to the crime. I'm here alongside Dan Schorr, and I'm just dying now to know what's going to happen because defense is finally going to put up their case. We heard some rumors. Maybe they might rest without putting anyone there. But we should see in a couple of minutes if the defense is going to put up a case. If you're Jeffrey Willis's defense attorney, and you're not listening to Jeffrey Willis, who may want to testify because that's probably a bad move. What do you do as a defense attorney? What do you do in a case like this?
Well, it's really easy. The correct legal strategy is not to testify. That's not even a close call here because I mean, getting on the stand, he subjects himself to cross-examination about all of this. And of the 3 women he's accused of abducting, 2 of them murdering, this is the weakest case that he's on trial for now because there is no body and no direct evidence of him doing that abduction. So the defense attorney at the end, without damaging defense, testify on his own, can say, look, he's a terrible person, he's done terrible things, but in this one case, there's not evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict him. That's going to be harder if the defendant takes the stand and starts hurting himself.
Dan, is what I call the CSI effect true? And the reason I bring it up in this case is because, you know, years ago, before we had all of this DNA evidence linking these shows that said you have to find the DNA in anything to convict someone, you know, cases where a lot of the time guilty verdicts were found based on largely circumstantial evidence. Do you think that we're going to the extreme here? I mean, if we don't see conviction in this case, the CSI effect could be in full effect here.
Well, certainly people expect to see a DNA everywhere.
Right.
So they expect that if he did this abduction, his DNA would be there. Her DNA would be all over him and his clothing and his car. So, people expect that. However, in this case, there's so much other evidence showing the pattern that's alleged with 2 other abductions and 1 other murder that he's alleged to have committed. So that's going to be powerful here. But right, the jury might expect a lot of actual DNA evidence that they don't have here. But remember, in the days before the DNA evidence, there were some wrongful convictions that were overturned.
True.
Although circumstantial evidence on the other side can be the most powerful evidence if it all shows that only one conclusion is logically possible. So it can cut either way.
So there wasn't DNA evidence, but there was a lot of forensic evidence on that computer. We listened to some of the forensic experts' testimony about what he found on Jeffrey Willis's computer. Disgusting stuff that no one should be looking at. Let's take a listen to more of what he had to say.